We saw the baby boom generation caused the greatest boom in history from 1983 through 2007. Okay, everything was easy then. We didn't have to have all these massive stimulus programs, and if we had a recession or a crash in the market, it didn't last long. Like 87 came right back to new highs. 2000, 2002, 2007, 8. But that's because we had favorable conditions, and I was one of the few people in the world that saw that all the way back to the early to mid 80s when they were just coming in. But I was working with new ventures who were dealing with younger baby boom clients and customers in new emerging markets. And so I had to study their customers, which were the baby boomers. And that's when I got the bright idea economically. Oh my gosh, nobody's looking at the impact of this unusually large generation. And by the way, if I go back historically, generations of this magnitude come about every 250 years. And that's when you see major revolutions and major bull markets and stuff to follow and all. So I was first to pick up on that, but that did peak in 2007, right on schedule. I was even shocked. I mean, I was saying late 2007, a long-term peak in the markets, way back even in the 80s. And so 2008, we go into this deep recession, which looked more like 1930. And Ben Bernanke was the Fed chairman then. And Ben Bernanke's thesis was the Great Depression, his PhD thesis. So he saw it the same way I did. He was like, oh my gosh, this looks like 1930. And so they just stepped on the spigots, and so did the EU, Mario Draghi. Mario Draghi told short traders in Europe, if you dare short this market, I will blow you out of the water with as much stimulus as they. In other words, he says, I will print unlimited amount of money to keep from having a crash here. So that was actually, folks, a new era in economics. People think, oh, they must have done this in the Great Depression, the 29-32 crash. No, first of all, they didn't have massive stimulus in the roaring 20s. It was a natural bubble boom with very favorable immigrant demographics back then and very favorable technology cycles with telephone, electricity, and phones rushing mainstream for the first time. And then that bubble turned into not a normal recession, but a Great Depression. So one thing, folks, to remember here, if you look at history and see depressions instead of recessions and longer downturns, depressions follow bubble booms, and bubbles are rare. There would have been no bubbles until the mid to late 90s in stocks and the early 2000s in real estate. That was the first bubbles since the roaring 20s, okay? And so we've been in this bubble economy. It keeps crashing, but what did happen here, starting in 2008-9, for the first time in history, governments finally figured out, wait a minute, we have the power to combat this. And again, you think a bunch of stimulus and money printing in the roaring 20s. No, I mean, in the Great Depression. No, they did have public works progress on a lag for 1934 forward. They did not do this money printing and massive stimulus and stuff, okay? So that's what's happened. Here's an important thing to note, okay? The most important thing I can say today. Why, after this massive generation peaked in spending and should have caused a long-term slowdown from 2008 to 2022-23, that's right up till recently, just like it did from 69 to 82 in the previous generation and 29 to 42 in the one before that. Why didn't that happen? It's because governments did realize they, for the first time, central banks print enough money to just cover it over. And believe me, when the Fed printed the first trillion and Mario Draghi did similar in EU in 2009, they thought that'd be it. Oh, the economy's just in a slump. We'll just wake it up. Well, it didn't because of what I was looking at. A large generation had peaked in spending, and spending was going to slow for 12 to 14 years before it even picked up again. So what they did, they covered over what would have been another kind of great long-term depression. And I'm the only guy that'll tell you this number, $27 trillion since 2008. 9 of that just printing money out of thin air, injecting in the economy, and 19 of it was running unprecedented large 15 years straight of deficits. Governments are supposed to run deficits in bad time and surpluses to make form and balance that. So the question is, well, but the economy's done pretty good, been growing at 2 to 3%, and stocks have made new highs beyond anything. If you'd have gone by my natural cycles before, stocks would have made their highs in 2007 and gone sideways until recently and just be starting to move into the millennial boom. So we've got the most perverted, that's the best way to call it, economy in history, because governments naively decided to stimulate at all costs to prevent a recession from getting worse in 2008, which they did. They cut that off. That would have gone into 2010, just trust me from history, and gone deeper. And then we would have had another crash in 2020 to 22 before this was over, and the demographics with the millennials got positive and the economy could grow healthfully on its own again. But we didn't. Instead, we've lived on $27 trillion of stimulus. And hey, they just pulled back. Okay, they just raised interest rates and they let the balance sheet, that accumulated money printing, they go off $2 trillion. Okay, but we're still in massive net stimulus. The balance sheet started at $1 trillion. It's just gone from 9 down to 7. Okay, and interest rates have just gone from 0 forever, which is highly stimulative, to 5.25. They're going to bring them back to about 3% or 300 basis points, they call it. That's their goal here, bring them back to normal slowly. Okay. But we're still in stimulant mode. One of the reasons the economy hasn't dropped off as much as people think with this $2 trillion reduction in the balance sheet and 5.25 base rate hike is we're still running huge deficits, which is the biggest part of the stimulus, and we're still net stimulus at 475, even if we go down to 400 basis points by the end of the year, which seems to be the plan. So you have to look at the whole picture. How did we get here? Why isn't people asking, why did it take 27 trillion? Well, nobody's told them it took 27 trillion to keep this monster alive. But why did it take that? And why do people think we can keep just printing our way into prosperity? The chickens will come home to roost in this. I think it's going to happen in the next 2 years. People used to say back then it's the government deficits causing inflation. No, our government deficits in a low inflation environment have outstripped those by far. It was the baby boom generation entering the workforce. It cost a lot of money to raise those kids by the parents. It cost a lot of money for businesses to incorporate and train them at first. They don't pay off from day one. Sorry, it actually takes about 3 years to break even on a new worker, okay? And then governments, all of this stuff, government that caused these massive inflation, but it was mainly the baby boom entering the workforce. I have one indicator that has gone back decades, always been accurate on inflation until this massive stimulus: workforce growth. And that means young people coming in is inflationary, but that also means, and now we have the retirement of the baby boom, older people leaving is more disinflationary or deflationary if it gets so far. So no economist on earth would tell you the biggest single cause of inflation is workforce growth. And that is what it is. I wasn't an economist. I took a major in economics and quit after the third course because it was vague and conceptual and hard to apply, and nobody can understand it. Even economists don't understand it. And economists have been the worst people to predicting the economy, especially long term. Okay. So that's when I started doing my own research, and I was working with these small businesses, turning them around in the 80s. They were growing, and small businesses always overexpand and crash. And so I was a turnaround manager, but I was doing my research on the side. And that's where I stumbled on, oh my gosh, there's no mystery of why the economy grows. People enter the workforce at 20 after being a liability to the whole economy, including their parents, and start earning money and spending like crazy. And that happens from 20 on average to precisely 46. Not everybody, but those averages are solid numbers. And now it's only moved to 47 for the peak in spending. So what I learned in that research is the economy is predictable if we look not at government policies, which are hard to change. I don't care who gets elected, Kamala or Trump. They're not going to be able to make but so much change in an economy, especially if it gets in trouble and stuff. This is what really causes long-term growth. And we can project this. If once somebody's born, we know they're going to enter the workforce at 20 and become productive, and then spend the most money at 46, and then save and invest the most money at 63. These are precise numbers, and they've held up over time, and they only go up. Look, we can project booms and busts and inflation and disinflation and deflation over the rest of any of our lifetimes and maybe even our kids. That's been my view, and people think I'm crazy because of that. But it's not. You have to get at the simplicity to understand complexity. I don't care how complex something is. The paradox is everything's also simple. From people to our economy, 46-year lag for the peak spending is the best indicator I ever discovered. And it's simple, and I could explain it to a damn 10-year-old. That's the biggest misunderstanding that most people have. Oh, these new technology. Oh, but they're going to eliminate workers. What? Okay, so we shouldn't have had automobiles and electricity, and we shouldn't have had microcomputers and now personal computers. No, this is absurd. Of course they displace old industry. They create better, more productive, new industries every time. When the Japanese started taking market share in all of our steel and automotive and type of industries, I was saying this is bullish, folks. They're taking the old granny industries and we're leading all the new high tech and baby boom generated, new markets and industries. Japan is not going to surpass us. We are not going to become number 2 to Japan and be bowing down to East Asia, okay? And we still aren't here later because we excel and we have California in our country, which has Hollywood entertainment and technological high-tech innovation in the world and still does. And there's going to be more competitors and we're going to lose our edge slowly, but that's what's kept us going. The other thing is, yes, our population's aging. Yes, it's slowing, growth is slowing, but we had this baby boom coming in the 80s. I mean, this pessimism, I was facing it from day one, early mid 80s, when I started saying we could see a Dow at 10,000 by 2000 and the greater boom would go much higher than that, could be 20, 30,000 by 2007 until baby. People thought I was crazy. The Dow hit 12,500 by 2000 when people thought 10,000 was not even a possibility. So that's the power of being able to take something complex and say, okay, what's the simplest driving indicator? And I came to the conclusion back then there was 2. One is these generational surges in spending and worker productivity, supply and demand expanding at the same time. More consumer spending, but the same workers who are spending are making things more productive as they're learning on the job in their cycle into their 40s and stuff, okay? The other one is a technology, and that happens every 39 years, okay, to be precise. 29, 68, 2007, peaks and booms, exactly 39 years apart on this predictable demographic side. The other one is technology and innovation. I used to think it was on the same generational clock, and I kept digging. Nope, doesn't quite correlate. 45-year cycle. Within that cycle, you get a radical innovation surge like personal computers, and then an extension, a maturity surge called like the internet. That happens, 2 booms on a 45-year cycle. So what did we see in the tech markets and these bubbles? And that's where the bubbles come from, this 45-year cycle. The first tech cycle peaked in 2000 in a bubble from 95 to 99 in early 2000 in stock and crashed 78%, even though we barely had a recession and the demographics were keeping the economy soaring, okay? Second bubble, right just recently, late 2021. And then that's been crashing, but all this stimulus has kept things kind of at bay for now. I say we still have that second major crash from the demographic slowing, but now the only cycle that's been positive in the late 2021 was this 45-year technology cycle, and now it's going to be negative all the way into 2032. So these are the 2 things that drive our economy long term. There's also a geopolitical cycle, but that just affects valuations and people's optimism. The real economic growth comes from these 2 cycles almost exclusively, and I can project these 2 cycles for you, your grandparents, or your kids over the rest of any of their lifetime. That's how powerful this is. So at least you know where things are going overall. My problem now is the government decided they were not going to accept the recession, which was a depression, as Ben Bernanke saw it, starting in 2008, and they've just blown their way out of it. And again, no apparent consequences so far. I say to people, I think these chickens are going to come home to roost in the next few years, and we're going to have a crash that should have occurred 2020 to 22 or 23, probably into late 2024 to 26 or 7. And then we will see the millennial boom. But from day one, all my books are going to look back. The millennial boom, as much as everybody said, there's more millennials than baby boomers. They're a bigger generation. Yes, but they're spread out over a longer period of time, and their relative growth as a wave never as big as the baby boom. Our economy will never see a decade like the 90s again. That was the best decade ever. And you know what? I'd be best at advising presidents when to run. Bill Clinton walked into a decade he couldn't have screwed up if he had to. And I'm not saying he did. He didn't. I'm just saying that decade would have been great with or without him. Ronald Reagan walked into a deep recession in the early 80s, which I think the new president's going to face here. So an outsider's going to be. but it should be booming by the time the next election comes after this. And that's what happened to Reagan. He came into a downturn, 80 to 82, and then by 84, the next election, the things were soaring, and he looked like he turned around the worst downturn in history since the Great Depression. He was a shoo-in for re-election. So this affects politics. I don't care who gets elected. The politics doesn't matter that much. If it did, I would study it more. But I would be good at advising presidents and people when to run or not. Whoever wins, especially the outsider, if Trump wins it, because Kamala's going to get blamed for this downturn. Trump would. You can't blame somebody coming new from the outside for a recession that just started when you came into office. And Reagan was not blamed for that. Franklin Delano Roosevelt came in after the bottom. He wasn't blamed for the Great Depression, and he looked like the guy that turned it around too. So this election is important to whoever gets elected because things should be better on the far end. And again, it would be big plus for Trump. He'd be crowing about this so long, I'd have to move farther away than Puerto Rico to get away from.